When painting doors, I like to remove them off their hinges, lay them horizontally. I find that the paint goes on smoother and there's less chances of dripping. However, I have to deal with removing the hinges. For example, in this case, there's a little space there, so I'm able to get a screwdriver underneath, and then I can pop that pin out. Other times, there isn't any space to stick a screwdriver, then you have to go in there with some kind of a gripping tool and see if you can lift that pin head up to get the pin out. If not too careful, this can result in dents and scratches into the trim work. But what if there was a better way to remove the pins without the risk of damaging the woodwork? Well, thanks to the Home Depot Seeds program, we're going to look at the Everbilt hinge pin remover. Before we continue, let's look at the parts that make up the typical door hinge. We have 2 hinges, screws that hold those hinges to a frame and a door. There's a pin, hinge pin, that goes through, and then these are called hinge knuckles, one for each side of the plate. The hinge may also contain a bottom cap. Inside the packaging, you have an instruction sheet, the actual hinge remover and installer, which measures just about 4.5 inches long, almost 1 inch wide. It has a clip so that you can put it in your pocket protector. It has a metal pin that is used to hopefully push the hinge pin out. There is a hinge knuckle holder so that you can actually attach this to the hinge and only use one hand to operate the hammer, which you'll use to strike here. There's one other thing that you should know. This area can be used also to help get the pin out. The top of the pin would be here, and then you'd wedge, much like you would with a screwdriver, between the pin head and the hinge, and then by striking down here, you'd push it up. Let's put it to the test. Here we are at our first hinge with our hinge pin remover and installer. This pin right here is what you want to go underneath, so that when you strike up with the hammer on the bottom of here, it will push the pin up. Now, this home was built in 1968, and if you look at the bottom of this, it's rounded and it's solid, so there's no place for this pin to go into. Our only option, I guess, is to try the auxiliary pin remover, which means we would have to try to get underneath this. And as you see, it's really not catching. So in this situation, it looks like I'm going to have to try either a screwdriver or some type of a gripping tool, maybe pliers, to grab this little head and then maybe strike the plier from underneath to pull this pin out. Yes, there's a way to remove that bottom cap. You could come in here with a screwdriver or some other prying tool and get the cap out, but that exposes us to damaging the trim or the door, which is what we were trying to avoid by using the tool. So if I have to use a screwdriver to remove this cap, I might as well just come up here and take the pin out and leave the cap in place. So it seems that this is not a solution that works for all hinges. And looking around the home, we finally found the hinge that does have an opening at the bottom. You see that hole there? So now we're able to put the pin in there, and you have to make sure the pin goes below. And if you do this right, you can actually have this knuckle holder attach. Here's the striking area, and as you can see, it's away from the trim and the door. So if you're striking here, hopefully you won't miss and hit the wood. There's also a viewing window, so you can actually see the pin, and then now you see that it's inside the hinge. And if I grab a hammer, can see that the hinge is starting to come up. And because the striking edge is further out, there's less of a chance that you'll do any damage to the wood. With the hinge partially out, we pull this tool off and now we're going to use the auxiliary tip to get underneath the flat portion of the hinge, like that. And now we're going to get our hammer and strike upward until we drive that pin totally out of the hinge. To drive the pin back down, you simply put the pin into the hinge until it stops. And now we're going to use this flat side of the tool, place it right over the head, and then you're going to strike here. And that will drive the pin back into the hinge. Of the 14 doors in this house, only one can utilize this tool to remove the hinge pin, which leaves me using screwdrivers, pliers to remove all the others. So before you go picking up this tool and thinking it'll be the one thing that'll solve all your issues when needing to remove a hinge pin, make sure that there is an opening at the bottom of the hinge for this pin to go into. And by the way, another way to remove this hinge pin is just to put a long nail, thick nail in here, and just knock that pin out. The only difference between using a nail and using this tool to pop out a hinge pin is that because this has a clip, you can attach this to the hinge knuckle and then just worry about striking without having to hold this in place. Whereas if you were using a nail instead of this pin to knock out the hinge pin, you'd have to hold the nail in place while you're striking. Overall, I don't think this is a must-have tool, especially if a lot of your doors don't have a hole to stick this pin into. But even if they do, you still have to use this portion of the tool to knock the pin out all the way. And I don't see this as being all that advantageous versus using a pair of pliers, a screwdriver, or a nail to get the hinge pin out. This plastic clip scraped up on one use, so I'm a little bit doubtful about its durability. If you decide that maybe you want to throw this in your handyman bag and you're doing a fair amount of door work, I don't know if this will be the long-lasting tool. And then when you go to put in the hinge pin, you're basically using this surface on top of the hinge, and then you're striking on this. Well, you could strike on the hinge pin directly, as this doesn't do a lot of protection, because if the trim is up against this piece of plastic, you could damage it. If you found this video interesting or useful, leave us a comment, give us a thumbs up, join the subscription team, and as always, thank you ever so much for watching.